The next topic we're going to talk about is the personal experiences of cops. And when we had our panel up here and we went through all these different officers that we had, everyone talked a little bit about their own personal life. And what you saw was cops are like anyone else. They have families, some are single, have different hobbies and kids and not kids. And so, ultimately we're real people just like everybody else. We do have some stressors in our job, obviously. In fact, you've seen that in some of the sections we've talked about. So we're going to do a couple things in this section of the presentation. First, we're going to talk about something called critical incident stress management, which is really how do we manage the stress we experience in some of the more dramatic incidents that we deal with. And we've got a professional in that field to come up and talk about that. And when he's done, then I'm going to talk about a little bit more mundane stuff like what's the work hours, what's the work schedule that we work, and how much do we get paid, and what's kind of just those mundane details of life that affect all of us. So I'm going to start by introducing Rich Flatten, and Rich is from the Critical Incident Stress, the Metro Area Critical Incident Stress Management Team. This is the group we call in if we have a critical incident with one of our officers, have them sit down and talk it through and try to make sure we're managing that properly. So, Rich, come on up.
Thanks, Chief.
You bet.
Well, good afternoon. Thanks for coming in. What I'm going to talk about today is a little bit about my background, but we're going to talk about the Critical Incident Stress Management Team. If you look at the background, why do we have CISM? Well, it's having a big impact on our life, it's having a big impact on our families, and a big impact on our careers. If you look at the statistics that are out there on critical incident stress, it's the most common thing that you're going to find throughout law enforcement. You may get yourself involved in a number of different areas of law enforcement, but the one thing that's going to be consistent throughout is going to be stress. It can be stress that comes from a critical incident outside, just dealing with the public, just dealing with the media that we see from a day in, day out basis now, but it also can come from within the department. If you have real controversy and stress within your department, that applies to you as well. You take that stress and you also apply it to your family as well. So when you go home and you try to protect your family, a lot of times you're not doing that. You're relaying a lot of that stress onto your family. What the Critical Incident Stress Management Team is we go in when there's critical incidents or officers that are having problems, and we try to de-escalate the stress that they're dealing with. We want you to have a long, happy career. And what we didn't do years ago is deal with that stress when it came up. You're going to have stress. That's the one consistency. How often are you going to have it? Well, that's what we need to look at. What is stress? Well, stress can be emotional, it can be cognitive, physical, and spiritual, okay? It can be all those things combined. When we talk about emotional, it can be emotional. It crushes you to the point that you feel like crying, and sometimes you need to cry, okay? What I'm going to tell you, if you feel like crying, cry, because that's how we get the stress hormones out of our body. When we get under stress, your brain goes into a fight or flight mode, okay? That's how we survive. And what it does is it puts 1,500 chemicals over the top of your brain, and that causes all your blood to come into your center core and to your brain and gets you ready to fight. So when you get hurt or cut, you're anesthetized. You don't feel pain right away. You don't bleed heavily right away, okay? You also start getting tunnel visioned, and your hearing starts diminishing. That's a protection device of your body. After that stress is gone, we still have those chemicals flowing through our body, and we need to get rid of them because that can hurt us if we're not under stress to have those stress chemicals going. So what CISM does is it gives you those help techniques to help you diminish those stress hormones and chemicals in your body. Cognitive, just the way that you think, okay? So after a stress type situation, and we talk about this in law enforcement for officer-involved shootings, right away when I got into law enforcement, if we had an officer-involved shooting, the first thing that they would do is they would take you back to the station and they'd have you give a statement. Well, what we found out throughout looking at stress in law enforcement is that's a bad thing to do. Because when you get under stress and those hormones are coursing through your body, your brain goes into screensaver. You don't remember anything. And it takes a while for that brain to come back online. It takes about 48 to 72 hours for your body to recover from it and your brain to start thinking, what just happened? So in that 48 to 72 hours, we can get a night's sleep, good night's sleep, maybe 2 good night's sleeps. We get some protein in our body, some good food, okay? We associate with our family members, okay? And once we get that done, now things start coming into view. And that's when we start interviewing officers that are involved in officer-involved shootings, because now things are coming back to them. They can understand them. Physical, you may have things like headaches. You may feel nauseous. You may feel weak-kneed. Anything that's physical, you may just all of a sudden feel beat up. Well, you're going to, because you have been beat up emotionally and physically. And the spiritual end of things. In some circumstances, when we get to the point when we talk about accumulated stress, so as we go through our career, if we don't deal with those stress situations, those critical incidents as we go along, they accumulate. They just pile on top of each other to the point that it just annihilates you. Now, I'll give you an example of that. Through 30 years of law enforcement, okay, my last 9 years of law enforcement was as a patrol sergeant. And before that, I dealt with a lot of different critical incidents, okay? There was 19 homicides that I was a part of investigating, either as an evidence officer or as a lead investigator. There was hundreds of death scenes. There's thousands of assaults and incidents. And there's a lot of fatal accidents. You're dealing with a lot of tragedy, a lot of bad things. That accumulated to the point about year 29 in my career, until I woke up one day and I couldn't remember anything. I couldn't see straight. I couldn't think straight. Stress had all of a sudden just slapped me in the side of the head, and I didn't know what was going on. So I said, I gotta do something about this. I gotta go talk to somebody. So I went and talked to a psychologist. And what I was diagnosed with is depression and anxiety, okay? Those don't work together really well. But what we're finding out is that officers do deal with both of those at the same time, and they kind of degrade against each other. That can cause problems within yourself. That's when you start having discipline problems and those type of things that you can't explain, but they're still happening, okay? And stress is the one that's causing that. Is that the end of your career? Absolutely not, because there's a lot of different techniques, and mine was just talk therapy, talking with this person, to decompress all that stress that I had been dealing with. Now, I've been a peer counselor with the CISM team for about 7 years now. So if we're looking at 7 compared to the 30 years that CISM's been around, there's about 23 years in there, or 23 years in there, of stress that was unresolved. Okay, so you're piling a lot of stuff on top of each other. And there's things that happen that you really don't think cause stress, but they do pile up. So if you're feeling those stressor type of things, that's what we come in and deal with. And we can deal with officers one-on-one, talk to them individually, or we can talk to them in a group as far as if there's a fatal accident. And the number one thing that we're dealing with right now is incidents that involve child deaths. 90% of what we respond to is child deaths. That's really devastating to emergency responders. Just not police officers, but firefighters and paramedics as well. Okay, when we look at stress in critical incident stress, it's a normal reaction to an abnormal event. Your body is trying to take care of you, and sometimes you think, am I going crazy because I'm feeling some of these things that are happening? I feel like I want to cry. I don't know that God is watching over me anymore. When you talk about spirituality, you maybe go to church all the time, and now you're second guessing your spirituality. Is this just, why is God doing this to me? That type of thing. 87% of the critical incidents you go to, officers have a reaction to it, some type of reaction. It can go from just maybe barely a reaction to an overt reaction where they can't function anymore. They aren't listening to the radio, they can't drive, they don't know how they got from point A to point B. Their brain is somewhere else. That's an indication that stress is having an effect, okay? Any situation where we talk about critical incidents, any situation beyond the realm of the person's usual experience that overwhelms his and her sense of vulnerability. You just get to the point that the teapot has gone off, okay? And you just can't deal with it anymore. Usually on a day-to-day basis, I can deal with this and do this, but now all of a sudden, boom, things stop. And you wake up and you think, I just can't do this anymore, okay? That's what ends up happening. First in my career, this is one of the big first incidents that I responded to. When I got this call, the call was an accident with a small car fire. Does this look like a small car fire? This is not a small car fire, and it just wasn't a small car fire. You look where the firefighter's standing on the left-hand side, there was a woman trapped in that car. But these flames from this fire, when I pulled up, were about 100 feet over the top of Lyndale Avenue freeway ramp. This was a big fire, okay, and she was trapped in the car. You get to the point that stress will make you do anything. And it was me and another Bloomington officer that actually ran into the flames, pried the car off that door, and pulled her out of the car and got her into an ambulance, all right? The big stressor came the next day when I went to the police station and I was talking to my dispatcher about the call. We did everything great. We couldn't do anything better in this call. But just talking it over with my dispatcher, my captain came in and he said, come into my office, all right? This is within the first year of my career, okay? When a captain calls you in the office, that's never really a good thing. So I was thinking really bad, and it was. He started scolding me about why I was listening to the tape and what was I talking to the dispatcher for. A lot of that back then, remember, SISM wasn't a big thing back then, okay? It really wasn't even in infant stages at that point in time. But he scolded me for doing something that I should have been doing, okay? Should be downloading and talking it out. Basically all it is. But he told me I should just move on. And I actually did. It wasn't too far after this incident happened that I left there and went to Burnsville. And the reason that that happened was I wasn't being taken care of. I wasn't being taken care of internally. I don't blame the department because this really wasn't on the radar of the department at that point in time, okay? But we know better about that now. And like the chief talked about, that's why we get involved in these situations when the departments feel the need to do that. These are almost always critical incidents in what we're seeing at this point in time. When we talk about child violence, trauma, or death, always going to be a critical incident, and that's what we're finding. Use of deadly force. So if you use deadly force, that's going to be a stressful situation, especially afterwards. You may be convinced that you did the exact right thing, and you probably did. But the court system and the civil system afterwards is going to take a toll on you. Some of the people that I supervised that at the last 9 years of my career have just been involved in officer-involved shootings in Burnsville, and 2 of them in the past year. Okay? They're going through a lot of stress. So it's good that I can go back to them and deal with them and talk with them as well. Grisly crime scenes. When you have really grisly crime scenes and they're prolonged, it's hard to deal with those. So those are critical incidents as well. A coworker suicide, we don't have a lot of those, but we do have them from time to time. And a prolonged event, airplane crash, major accident, any of those type of things. Mass casualty, once again, the airplane crash. Any other overwhelming event, okay, the 35W bridge going down, that would be a very overwhelming event. So when we look a few years later, this is a night that I was working, and I responded to an accident of a pedestrian hit on 35W. It's unusual, but really wasn't thinking anything of it, all right? And we responded, and we got out there, and we walked up to the scene. You see those ambulances way up there. My squad car's on the right-hand side. Way, way, way up there is a 5-year-old girl, okay? For some reason, she ran across and was going to touch the guardrail on a dare and run back across, but she never made it to the guardrail. She got hit by a car at freeway speeds, okay? What causes critical incident stress is something that shocks you. It's not something that you're responding to. So I'm responding to a citizen hit on the freeway, and I'm thinking it's an adult that maybe is drunk or for whatever reason they're on the freeway and they got hit. Not a 5-year-old girl at 10 o'clock at night on a Friday night, okay? But is there a change? Okay, this was in 2010. Has there a change happened over that 30 years? Absolutely. Because once this was resolved, and there was a lot more things that happened that were stressful, especially in my supervisory role here, but once I got back to the station at 12:30 Friday night, okay, my chief and my captain are standing in my office, and they're telling me, you can go home if you want, because we'll run the shift for you. Would that have happened 20 years earlier? Absolutely not. That would not have happened, okay? It would have been just go back out and do your thing. That was nice of them to do that, and that had a big impact on me. But I still wanted to be there to work with my people and take care of my people on the street. So that's what I did. I stayed and took care of them. But it meant so much to me that they actually came in on their time and that they wouldn't be at the station anyways to want to take care of that. That's what we're talking about in dealing and downloading that stress. Just those little things that supervisors can do first of all, but then if we have prolonging effects, we can bring in our peer counselors and download the stress even more. Some of the most common reactions that you deal with in critical incident stress, sleep disturbances are one of the biggest ones. That's the thing that keep on running this thing through your brain. It's going and going and going. You keep running it through your brain. You're going to still, next time that you smell burning rubber or you have to drive through that intersection, you're going to have a flashback to that. What we do with critical incident stress management is take the edges off of that. It's okay to feel the feelings that you're having, and it's okay that you survive that, but we just want you to understand that you're going to have some reaction whatsoever as you go through there. Sadness is another one. You can't stop thinking about the event. Anger and irritability. Okay, and anger and irritability is a big one when we talk about a death of a child. We're there to save the children, and when we can't do that, it's a very hard time. One of the things that I dealt with, or actually two things that I dealt with that really kind of sent me over the edge into my depression, was in 1993, I responded to my parents' house that was in the jurisdiction in Burnsville that I was working, to my dad unconscious on the floor, okay? He didn't survive that. He actually survived for a year, but he had a brain tumor, and he ended up dying from that. From a psychological standpoint, when your parents die and you respond to it, okay, you can't save them, that is devastating to an emergency responder, okay? That was hard, but I didn't know that at the time. I kept on working through my career and working through it. But in 2014, I did the exact same thing to my mom, responded to her stroke, and she ended up living 3 days later. And the doctor in the hospital actually had me make the determination to pull her off of life support. Okay, real devastating again at that point in time. And that's about the point that my depression just kicked into overdrive. So we want to download those type of things. If my supervisors, if my bosses would have seen that and seen that I responded to those type of things and understood the psychological background of that, they probably could have gotten me some help earlier and got me into some type of critical incident stress debriefing for that incident. But it's out there now. We have it out there. Poor concentration. So if you have the type of thing that you usually know where your cell phone is and your keys are and you know where your appointments are and where you need to be, but all of a sudden you forget that. You don't know where your keys are. Now at my age, that's commonplace. I don't know where my keys are half the time. But if you normally have a routine and you have things that you know are going on routinely and you can't remember them, then you're probably dealing with some stress. Your mind is preoccupied, and we need to get some help for that. Forgetfulness and helping things. So when we talk about how to system it downloads stress reactions. We take those stress reactions that are normal and let you know that they're normal. We're telling you it's okay to feel the way that you're feeling, and this is the way, and this is the reason why you're feeling the way that you're feeling. It trains specific strategies for minimizing stress. What I do now is I actually go out throughout the state of Minnesota for SISM and train supervisors. We call it the first 90-minute protocol. We teach supervisors that are going through the Chiefs Academy up in Ripley this is what's going to happen to your officers in the first 90 minutes of a critical incident. And this is what you can do to take the edge off of it and help them move on past it, right? It may not prevent them from having a more overt reaction from the stress later on, but what it does is it gives them a reason and it gives them the skills to help them as they go along. We tell them to give them water, make them supportive, talk with them, make them feel like, you don't have to say if they did something right or did something wrong, but just talk with them so that they understand that they're human being. And it normalizes the stress. It normalizes the situation that it's okay, you're doing okay. Neutralizes the memories. So when we take this type of situation and we talk about it, when you talk about it and you hear yourself talking about it, you're starting to resolve that issue. And what you do is you just kind of put it in a manila folder, and you put it away. Sometime in the future, you may pull that out, okay, and revisit it psychologically, but it's not going to be devastating for you. It's like, okay, yeah, I learned something from that, and yeah, I've been here before, but I can handle it now because I'm going to go about it a different way. Really involved in officer-involved shootings. So if they responded to an officer-involved shooting, got into an officer-involved shooting, have a real traumatic experience from it, well, maybe they respond to a similar call a couple years down the line. Now they've learned for it, and they learn a different way to approach the situation. And it provides closure, okay, that I'm putting the end to this situation. They aren't career breakers. You're not going to end your career over this, okay? And most of the, if you get help early enough, it may even help you out as you go along. And it's not an occasion to find fault or blame. When we come in and we do critical incident stress debriefings, they are not technical debriefings. We do not look at fault. We don't look at blame, anything like that. We just look at what happened, because a lot of times these incidents are, I don't know what my partner was doing here. And the stress that I'm having over this is I don't know where my partner was and what I'm doing. So we get these people together, and my partner says, I was wrestling with somebody over here in the corner while you were taking rounds from this other person. Oh, okay. I understand that now. It fills in all the pieces. I'm good to go. That's all they need to do to resolve their stress.
Thanks, Rich. Very good. Appreciate it. Yeah, I can tell you that in our department, and we are, as we said earlier, a typical department, this is now the norm if we have a critical incident, is we talk about this stuff and we bring people in if need be. And it's not just kind of ignored or swept under the rug. So as you contemplate a law enforcement career, you can certainly expect to deal with some stress, as you can in many careers. We feel we are very proactive in addressing these things. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more now about personal experiences of officers. One of them is the work schedule, and as you see on our words, which we haven't referred to for a little while here, you know, stress, PTSD is up there. Those are the kind of things Rich talked about and how we try to be proactive in heading those off or dealing with them. There were also concerns expressed about, geez, I think about being a cop, but I'm not sure about the work schedule. It seems difficult. So rather than label it as a good schedule or a bad schedule, we just thought we'll put up our work schedule at the Champlin Police Department. And we are very typical. This is a very typical work schedule for a city police department. Just over half of our staff are patrol officers. They work one of 3 shifts. The day shift works from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., the mid shift from 5 p.m. to 3 a.m., and the night shift from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. These officers work 10-hour shifts, which means that they work on average 4 days a week instead of 5 like many of us do. What's interesting to me is that's actually a very popular work schedule in our department, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Our officers tend to like having those additional days off. And those days are sometimes on weekends and sometimes on weekdays. The shifts are awarded based on seniority. They basically bid the shifts they want to. So the longer you've been there, the more likely you can choose the shift that you want to work. And we have officers who could work night shift who choose to work mid shift and vice versa. And we have officers who could work day shift who occasionally work a night shift or a mid shift. Some of that depends on what's going on in their family life. Some of them, we've got an officer who coaches sports for his kids and he chooses to work nights because he gets all the coaching done and then he goes to work. So it's really, there's a lot of options there. Most of our other employees work Monday through Friday, 8-hour days. I work Monday through Friday, 8-hour days. What's interesting to me is at times, we have difficulty getting officers to willingly go into our investigative division because they actually like the patrol schedule. And you know, you look at the perceptions and people feel like, oh, it's you know, difficult hours or hard shifts to work, and yet in our department, we've got people who prefer those patrol shifts, which are a little different to the traditional Monday through Friday. Any hours that are worked beyond a scheduled shift, our officers are paid either in overtime or in additional time off. They also are given 11 holidays, and they can either take them as 11 days worth of time off, which they can choose to take off when they wish, or they can take it as additional pay. And they get 2 to 5 weeks of paid vacation every year. 2 when they start, 5 when they've been there for a while. So, you know, I'll leave this up for a minute, and those of you watching the video can kind of contemplate. This is a fairly typical arrangement in a police department. You can decide for yourself if this is something you could live with or work with. Again, looking at our perceptions or preconceptions about police work, some of our respondents said, I'd like to do the job because it pays well, and others said, I don't want to do the job because it doesn't pay well. So we're just going to simply give our wage scale, and you can decide for yourself if this is enough pay or not enough pay. These are our pay scales for 2017. If you're watching this in future years, you can reliably add 2 to 3% onto all of these numbers for each year after 2017. Brand new police officer is paid $23.78 per hour. That's on their first day. After 5 years, they're paid $36.71 per hour. And in between that first day and that 5 years, there's a steady progression of pay raises about every year, in addition to the cost of living increase. After 16 years, an officer is paid $40 an hour. And there again, between year 5 and year 16, there are some longevity steps that increase that pay more. The average officer in our department is paid $4,939 in overtime each year. Now that's an average officer. Some get a lot more than that, others take very little. That's sort of their call as to whether they want to work some of that overtime. So what that means is that an average officer with 16 years or more at our department earns $88,139 per year. And an average sergeant who's been on for 16 years or more earns $106,691 per year. And then all employees receive an additional up to $1,155 a month for health insurance. Okay, let me back up. So those are the pay scales. You know, the younger you are, the more money this probably looks like. I think some of you in the audience are saying, wow, that's a lot of money. I don't know. Let me just put that in perspective for you. This is a very solid middle class income. You can raise a family on this. You can have a decent home with this. You can drive a decent car. What you can't afford to do is go to the casino every weekend and blow this on bad habits. This can be very comfortable if you manage it well, but it's not so much that you can afford to blow it. So if that kind of gives you some perspective. And as I said earlier in the presentation, our police department is average in the state of Minnesota in terms of pay. We compare ourselves to comparable departments, and our policy is to pay the average of that. So there are some departments that pay more than this, and there certainly are some that pay less, but we feel we're in the middle.